Today, I want to talk about two in particular, as I was looking at your website in which aspects of human rights y'all are highlighting. And I saw two that are really dear to my heart, one of which is environmental rights, and the other is the right to privacy and the digital era. So not too long ago on the rights on digital, what I like to refer to as sort of digital civil rights, the right to privacy meant that nobody could search your house or your car, so on and so forth. They couldn't search your papers without having cause. But we don't really have papers anymore, right? We have these things. These are my papers, I think, and in the ways in which the founding fathers of the United States talked about civil rights. This should qualify as that, and today it doesn't. I think that's a problem, and so as a lawmaker, it's one of the things I would like to try to address. So all sorts of personal information, as you know, is bought and sold. Your browsing history is tracked, cataloged to sell you things, and your location can be tracked to help you get around, but also to sell you stuff, right? Nearby restaurants and shops. So it can be very convenient, but mobile devices collect fingerprints, facial recognition, they track your movements, and there's more than some evidence that they can. And I think by the admission of some companies, they do listen to and record your conversations even without you knowing it. So much of what we do now used to be things that we never thought could be tracked, cataloged, or sold. But today, social media, web browsing, while powerful tools to interact with the world and can help in organizing things with human rights, can also become the tools of oppression, and are also obviously mechanisms to collect countless types of personal data for commerce. Identity theft also is an ongoing problem, and the internet and social media applications have become tools for breeding hate and bullying others from the shadows. So while businesses monetize their private and personal data, we're becoming, I think, less safe and secure in many ways. These corporate interests obviously will not police or regulate themselves, so government must. And I have the opportunity to be both an academic and a lawmaker where I get to live in both of these worlds. I believe the kernel from which sensible regulation should flow is the fundamental notion that personal data being bought and sold to further deepen the pockets of just a small handful of people, that data belongs to us. It's our personal data after all. If it's monetized, the beneficiary should be us. It should be the individual. And the individual should absolutely have the freedom and flexibility to choose which, if any, of our data is sold and to whom as well. So in 2018, the state of California passed the California Consumer Privacy Act. That gives consumers more control over their personal information that businesses collect about them. This law went to effect, I think, this year, and it's billed as the toughest privacy law in the United States. It's potentially a model for other states like Hawaii. I'm looking at legislation to possibly introduce here to expand that law for Hawaii. And beyond the control of personal and private data, the proliferation of social media platforms around the world really has been an unfortunate breeding ground for hate speech and related problems. Sadly, this has had a profound impact on our children. Cyberbullying has become so prevalent in recent years as more and more kids are interacting daily on the internet through their smartphones, that social media platforms like Facebook, Instagram, Snapchat, while they can be fun, they're also obviously tools for bullying and threatening. School-age suicides are on the rise throughout the country, and it's really amazing to see the numbers, especially for younger kids, 10 to 14. And it's really upsetting to me as a father of two young children too. And so that's something else that I would like to see addressed, and I'm going to try to help address. At an absolute minimum, when individuals create these accounts for themselves, even if their screen name or their handle doesn't easily identify them in public, the purveyors and operators of these platforms, I think, must require accounts to be created with real and accurate information. Now, this is a two-edged sword, right? Because social media can be a tool for organizing under oppressive regimes. And so I don't think it should be readily available to them. But I think for law enforcement in our country, because Facebook, as it operates in the United States, is subject to US laws, that they should be able to provide the information and identity of people who are engaged in criminal activities such as harassment, cyberstalking, and so on and so forth. So that's one of the two topics. The other is environmental rights. As a professor, I get to teach a class on environmental ethics, and as a lawmaker, I get to introduce some bills around these issues. And so environmental racism is a big one for me. As the world gets smaller and smaller and communities around the world are intertwined in new and complex ways, we see environmental human rights as an area of increased concern. Climate change, sea level rise obviously threaten people everywhere, and we must keep in mind how these impacts affect the most disadvantaged and indigenous communities around the planet. While so many are talking about and seeking solutions to address and hopefully reverse the effects of climate change, um, in Hawaii, one of the things I think we want to look at is how environmental racism is affecting indigenous cultures where I represent in Western Oahu. It's a historically lower socioeconomic status area, and we have the power
Mhm.
plant, we have the wastewater treatment plant, we have the industrial pollution, right? And these things are generally put in areas where the lower socioeconomic status people are located, and that's unjust. But what we're seeing actually are patterns of installation of green energy, which I overall support, but those too are being put in communities of disadvantaged or indigenous peoples that negatively impact their quality of life for the benefit of the what we call the rich haoles in Hawaii. And people on Oahu and are looking to neighbor islands to put in massive solar plants, massive wind farms, and put an underwater sea cable to the main island. And this also follows a pattern of, I think, environmental racism. So those are some of the things we're looking at as well. The very last thing I'll talk about is with sea level rise. Obviously, the people who live on the beach in Hawaii are not poor. They tend to be very wealthy. And one of the things that I want to make sure we don't do is set up a society where we start bailing out billionaires for their third beach homes when sea level rise hits. And so we need disclosures in the real estate documents to ensure that they know legally that the state isn't going to step in with taxpayer money from the working people to bail out their wealthy um, homes. So, only when human rights are at the center of our policies can we really envision, I think, a world free of hunger and exploitation. And human rights are worth the fight. So, thank you for your time.